Fanmouth Fantasy Roundtable. Mouthing off at the roundtable today is myself, Erin Lee, Mr. Fantasy himself, Dave Del Grande, and the high-stakes hustler, Jeff Collins. We're here, as always, to give you our picks so you can pick your way to a fantasy jackpot this weekend. First up, we're going to talk about how we constructed our lineups. Dave, how'd you construct your lineup this week?
Well, each week I look for a couple of under-the-radar guys to slot quickly so that it allows me to spend big money on other guys down the line. And this week I found two guys from the same game who I think qualify. One is a fairly average salary, one is a below average salary, in a game between Atlanta and Arizona that I think is going to be a passing duel, a very high scoring game. I was very happy to get them as my wide receivers at a fairly low price, allowed me the luxury of having three high profile running backs and then the Brady Gronkowski tandem from New England. So I'm very happy with my lineup this week.
All right, sounds like you went pretty average price at wide receiver. Jeff, what was your plan?
For myself, I love spending a lot of money on quarterback and then figuring it out from there. I was planning on just punting the running back position and loading up on receiver and tight end, but I ended up finding a good value I liked at wide receiver that I'll talk about in a little bit that allowed me to spend a little more at running back.
Yeah, my plan this week was to go really heavy at running back and at quarterback, and then to sneak in somebody that maybe isn't the most popular pick but was cheap enough to make my lineup work. So we'll see what happens. Who's your quarterback pick this week, Dave?
Well, I went with Tom Brady this week, and he hasn't had a great season. I haven't recommended him at all this year. But I think he's trending upward. I think we're seeing New England start to get involved in the type of games that we're used to. Their last two games have been very high scoring. Their defense is falling apart, and I think it's no coincidence that all of a sudden it's forcing them to throw the ball more, forcing them to score more points in order to beat teams. Plus the fact that he got Gronkowski back last week for the first time immediately made him his prime target. The possibility that Amendola's coming back this week. We're finally going to see New England in their top offensive mode of the season. And like I said, I think Brady's playing himself up to his best game, and I think this will be his best game of the year.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Brady can put up points. He has the potential to do that. He's been the number one quarterback in fantasy at points in his career. But right now I'm not seeing it. I don't trust it yet. Even with Gronk back, he had a weak game last week, so I'm not trusting him. I love spending a lot on quarterback to make sure I'm going to get those points, and I did it this week with Drew Brees. Drew Brees is coming off of a bye week. The last 4 years that he's come off a bye week, he's had 4 touchdowns every single game and a minimum of 366 yards passing. So he goes up against Buffalo, who's a weak pass defense, and it's a match made in heaven.
Yeah, and to be honest, I probably would have taken Brees over Brady if I were wanting to spend that kind of money. I didn't have that kind of money to spend. I think Brees is not a bad choice, but I can see a couple reasons why I don't think he's going to have his best game this week. Number one is Graham probably won't play, and that's Graham to him is what Gronkowski is to Brady. I think a key receiver. Without him in the lineup, I think you're going to see his numbers go down some. Plus the fact that their running back situation is stronger than it has been. They've got 3 healthy backs now. Maybe they run the ball a little more as well. So, like I said, that doesn't mean he's going to have a bad week. That just to me says, well, if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I'd want a little better matchup.
Yeah, I've learned by now not to predict that the New Orleans Saints are going to start running the ball more. I mean, when they drafted Ingram, that's what everyone thought, and it just hasn't happened. And it doesn't matter that Graham's not going to play. They have weapons that they're not even able to use because they've got so many. Colston hasn't even seen that much action because he just can't get the targets. He's still good, but they're throwing the ball to Graham so much. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for points there.
Yeah, the Brady matchup, I don't really have anything too negative to say about it. It just doesn't excite me very much. What does excite me is Drew Brees. I have him in my lineup too. I think Drew Brees, even though he doesn't have Jimmy Graham, 2 weeks ago Jimmy Graham came up with a big goose egg, and the Saints were still able to put up plenty of points, and they're going up a Bills defense that has allowed the most passing touchdowns in the league, tied with Jacksonville. So that sounds like a pretty good matchup to me for Brees to have a big game. All right, Jeff, who are your running back picks this week?
Well, running back, as I said, I went a little cheap. I went with Maurice Jones-Drew as that low-level guy that I knew was probably going to be in my lineup. And then the guy that I actually got bumped up because of my wide receiver that I found as a value is Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell is getting a lot of carries right now. He's the main guy there. They're going to give him the goal line opportunities. He catches the ball out of the backfield. He's a very well-rounded back and a pretty solid matchup.
Well, I've got Le'Veon Bell in my lineup, too. I have very similar logic there. I like that pick. Well, I would not go with Jones-Drew this week. My problem with Jones-Drew is he's had a disappointing season. The 49ers defense seems to be getting better by the week. that to me just doesn't mix. I got disappointment against a great defense. I know his price is low, but I just don't see him snapping out of it this week.
Well, I mean, last week they gave up about 25 points to Chris Johnson, another struggling running back. That it's pretty much a great comparable for him. You know, those guys are pretty much in the same boat right now. The Niners are pretty banged up on the defensive line, and they're giving up over 100 yards and a touchdown per game on average.
Who are your running back picks this week, Dave?
Well, I've got 3 running backs this week, and all 3 are similar in some way. I went with teams that I think are taking more of a conservative approach to their game plans, and 3 teams that I think are going to win and are going to be allowed the luxury to run the ball as much as they want. I've got Le'Veon Bell, Pittsburgh playing at Oakland in a game where I think Pittsburgh is playing better now. I think Pittsburgh will dictate that game. Frank Gore of the 49ers, the other side of the Jones-Drew matchup. I think the 49ers are going to win easily against Jacksonville. Gore's had a great season. Ever since the 49ers have turned conservative, Gore's been averaging 100 yards a week. I think he could have great numbers again this week. My third back is Eddie Lacy of the Packers. I mean, you think of the Packers, you don't think of a running team, but their receiving core is all banged up now, and Lacy's been getting 22 or 23 carries each of the last 3 games, kind of unheard of for a Packers running back these days. But it's dictated by their quarterback not having all the targets out there. So, and Green Bay playing Minnesota this weekend, another good matchup. So I think all 3 running backs have a chance to carry the ball 20-plus times, and I'll take that anytime with a running back.
Yeah, you're right. All 3 great matchups. I love Gore, but I like Lacy even more. Lacy, you were dead on last week about, you talked about how this guy has actually some upside that I didn't foresee. The upside we found out is catches. He had like 4 catches last week, so that's good. You're getting a guy that can outcatch the ball, and you see catches add up. You see that with Danny Woodhead, how all of a sudden 4 or 5 catches can make your game. So I think those are solid picks there.
The only pick that you mentioned that I don't really agree with is Maurice Jones-Drew. I'm worried about that game becoming a blowout on the side of the 49ers, which means that Jacksonville is going to have to keep throwing the ball throughout the game, which means maybe Blackman's a better pick there. Your pick of Frank Gore goes with one of my picks. My 3 are Marshawn Lynch, Knowshon Moreno, and Kendall Hunter. The first 2 are pretty self-explanatory. 2 top 5 running backs going against very solid matchups in that it's 2 weak defenses. My Kendall Hunter pick, I probably have to explain a little bit. Like I said, I think this game's going to be a blowout, and I think they're going to want to give Frank Gore, their workhorse, a break. I think that's maybe when Kendall Hunter comes in, gets a few touches. He's reached the end zone 3 out of the last 4 weeks, and I think he could do it again against Jacksonville.
Well, your first 2 running backs, I think if you're going to pay big bucks for your running backs, you want matchups like this. I love both of them. I think Moreno could have a big game against Washington. Lynch could have a big game against St. Louis. Unfortunately, like you said, when you spend that kind of money, you need a very low price guy, probably in your flex position. And I just don't see this one. To me, when you have a second string guy, it works in certain matchups. It doesn't work. And my concern in this game would be this is going to be such a blowout, in my opinion, that the 49ers just might pass their second stringer and go right to their third stringer because, like you said, Hunter's gotten plenty of carries in games that have been competitive. They'd like to see James play a little bit more, and maybe this is their opportunity, kind of like a preseason game, to, hey, let's give James the entire second half. We're ahead by 28 points anyway. That would be my big concern.
I'm with Dave. Moreno and Lynch are solid picks there. Moreno is getting even better by the day because the backup running backs are fumbling. So when they get ahead, the big scare was that, well, they'll see what the young guys have. But now they're not going to trust the young guys with the ball and a lead. So Moreno's a great pick, but Kendall Hunter should not be in your lineup. I've never been so blunt with you before, but Kendall Hunter is not a good pick. He's had 11 carries once this year. He's very touchdown dependent, and he hasn't rushed for more than 50 yards all season. So there's better options that are cheap there for you.
I'll take a gamble on a $5,000 touchdown against the Jaguars. Dave, who's your wide receiver pick this week?
Well, I've got 2 wide receivers. I mentioned them earlier. They're Harry Douglas of the Falcons and Michael Floyd of Arizona. They play in the same game this week. One of the things I look for in matchups is trying to figure out what the coaches are going to game plan. Here you've got 2 teams that are poor at running the ball, facing teams that are good at defending the run. There is no reason for Arizona or Atlanta to run the ball at all in these games, especially when Atlanta wants to pass. Arizona's not good against the pass. Arizona wants to pass. Atlanta's terrible against the pass. So I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game, much higher than people would project. I think the quarterbacks have a chance to score big numbers, but among the receivers, Douglas had a huge game last week in much tougher circumstances than this. And Floyd, I think, has taken advantage of Fitzgerald's injury situation to become arguably as good as Fitzgerald is at this point. Not as good overall, obviously. So I like both of those matchups. I just think the strategy of those games dictate these lower price selections.
I like the matchup as well. I agree that both teams are going to pass a lot. I've got receiving options from both teams in that game as well. I just disagree with the selections. Harry Douglas, he had a really good game last week. He got 7 targets, caught all of them, and he averaged over 20 yards per catch, got a touchdown. All 3 of those things are hard to duplicate on a week-to-week basis. So catching all of your targets, he's not going to get more than 7 targets. So realistically, he's going to catch 4 to 5 of those balls. And the touchdowns, I mean, you know how hard to predict those are. And then we've got the 21-yard per catch average. That's just not going to be duplicated again. And then Michael Floyd, the Falcons are actually pretty good at shutting down the secondary wide receivers. Who you see go off is the primary wide receiver, like the Vincent Jackson last week. But the other guys don't really get much.
Well, the problem is that who's the primary wide receiver now for Arizona? The way Fitzgerald is limping around, but they threw him, 3 balls last week? They threw Floyd 10 balls? Heck, I think Floyd's their top receiver now. And then the Atlanta one that you went against, Atlanta threw the ball like 25 times last week. Well, of course they only threw 7 times to him. They're going to throw 45 this week, so I would expect 14 targets, and he's not going to be covered by Revis. Well, of course, you only threw to him 7 times with Revis guarding him. It's a miracle that he caught, more than 3 of them.
It's going to be covered by Patrick Peterson.
That's my fear.
He's good at returning punts.
What?
Come on.
Okay.
He's in Revis's category as a defensive back cover guy?
I don't necessarily, I wouldn't go that far, but
okay,
a lot
that's
of people
good.
would say that.
And next.
Well, I don't know where to start at this point. Number one, beginning of the year, you said Fitzgerald was the best receiver in the league. So how can you say that Michael Floyd's a better receiver than him?
He's injured.
He's fine.
Fitzgerald, they threw him 3 balls last week.
He's had 2 games over 20 points. How many has Michael Floyd had over 20 points?
And how many
0.
since he's been injured?
All right, Jeff, you clearly don't like his picks. Let's hear what you have.
Go with Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald from Arizona is the better pick there. He's super cheap. He's cheaper than Michael Floyd, and you're going to get more points. Like I said, Vincent Jackson went off last week, and you're going to see the primary receiver for going against the Falcons catching all the balls and really doing all the damage here. The other receiver, I've got 2. I've got a couple. I've got Des Bryant and Pierre Garçon. Both have really good matchups. Des, that's pretty self-explanatory. Pierre Garçon also going against Denver. It's going to be a shootout. You always see the teams that Denver's playing against putting up a bunch of passing yards. So I like both of those picks as well.
I agree with the Bryant selection. I think is a good pick. Garçon, to me, has been disappointing in that he's been inconsistent, and I think he's hard to predict. I agree with you. I think his matchup is good, but I've thought his matchups have been good in the past, and he hasn't done much. Then again, there have been other times where I thought his matchup wasn't good, and he's done well. He's hard to predict. He might have a great game. But like I said, my biggest problem is your selection of Fitzgerald. I just think that I think he's injured. I just don't think he's, last week, how do you explain what he did last week? Didn't even try to throw him the ball.
They did try to throw him the ball. It's just Palmer sucks. But
He still sucks this week.
the other thing is, though, Garçon is the most consistent wide receiver in the NFL probably. He's had 1 week of less than 6 receptions. How is that? I mean, he's had 6 receptions like 3 or 4 weeks in a row. Caught 7 once, caught 5 once. What's more consistent than that?
I'd like to see a little more yardage. Touchdowns. I mean, to me, there's more than.
Too. I mean,
they've played 7 games. You better have a couple touchdowns.
Well, yeah, he's one of the top receivers in the league right now.
Seems like there's plenty of disagreement to go around. I'm going to step outside the box and actually agree with you on your Des Bryant pick and follow it up with another wide receiver pick on the Cowboys, and that's Terrence Williams. And I think that Tony Romo's going to have plenty of offense to go around, and I think they can both benefit against a Detroit secondary that's been pretty much below average. My other wide receiver pick is Jarrett Boykin. I've clearly been reading the blog and listening to your advice, Jeff, because I'm pretty convinced after his performance last week. And yet another Green Bay receiver went down, Jermichael Finley, so I think there's only more balls left for Jordy Nelson and Jarrett Boykin. So I think another big week is in store for him.
Well, I think that what I like about the two receivers is, and Jeff talks about this a lot, I think they both have a lot of upside. I wouldn't take either one of them because I think they also have a lot of downside. I think that Williams is going to be a guy who's going to be inconsistent. I think Boykin had one good game. The week before, all they were talking about is how often he dropped the ball. And like I said before, I think Green Bay is going to run the ball more and more. So, I like the potential. I just don't. I don't know. I wouldn't take either one of them.
Boykin, of course, I like him. This week only, though. I think I'm going to jump off his bandwagon after this week. This week he has a great matchup, though. Terrence Williams, Dave made a great pick earlier in the year, jumping on his bandwagon before anyone else, and he pretty much predicted his breakout. My knock on him was, well, he can't catch the ball. You saw him dropping a bunch of balls in training camp, and then that first game where Dave had him, he dropped one ball and he fumbled the ball. Showed a little bit of butterfingers, but put up good points. Since then, he hasn't had a drop. He actually leads the league in percentage of balls caught when throw to, at 85.7%.
Last 4 weeks, 19 to 21.
Yep.
I think whatever his problem was, I think he started to fix it, and I like that.
Absolutely.
All right, who is your tight end this week?
Me, I've got Tony Gonzalez. I've got the number one tight end at the position at a discount. Basically, he's going against a great matchup in Arizona right here. I told you that I had another option here for Atlanta that's better than Harry Douglas. Tony Gonzalez blows him away. Atlanta cannot cover tight ends, and Erin kind of turned me on to this last week. She said, what do you think of Zach Miller? I said, I don't know about that. Sure enough, Zach Miller tears up the
Thanks
Cardinals.
a lot. You drove me away from him.
Well, yeah, now I'm a believer, and you get an elite tight end going against this defense. It should be all Tony Gonzalez this week.
I agree with that. I mean, I liked Gonzalez last week, and for whatever reason, he had a terrible game. Douglas, of course, far outperformed him last week. I think they both have a chance because Atlanta has no other passing options, and I think they're going to throw the ball a lot. I think they both have a chance to have a good game. So I've got no complaint there.
No complaint there, but I'm sure you have someone else. Let me guess. Gronkowski?
Well, geez, how did you guess? The guy's played one game, and already he's to me he's back to where he was before. I mean, it wasn't. I think I talked about this last week too, or whenever the last time I had him. I've had him a couple of times when he hasn't even played. But he's not like he blew out his knee. He had an arm injury. People have talked about how he's been ready to play for weeks. He came back in good shape. Brady immediately made him his favorite target. He had a monster game without getting into the end zone against a pretty good Jets defense. I just see him as far and away New England's best target, a guy who's going to be targeted 12 to 18 times a game. And I think he's going to have more 100-yard games than not this season.
I agree with all of that analysis, and in general, I do love Gronkowski. I wouldn't even tell you to not put him in your lineup this week, but I would caution you this. He's really expensive this week. There's only 3 wide receivers that are more expensive than him right now. You can get Tony Gonzalez's, he's 50, let's see, Gronkowski's 50% more expensive than Gonzalez. So you're just spending a lot of money to get maybe a little bit better production, but I think Gonzalez is a better way to go.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for one of you to say something negative about Gronkowski at any point this season. I wish that I could have had either one of those guys. I thought about putting them both in my lineup. They were both way too expensive for me. So I had to go with a tight end that was pretty cheap, and that's Jordan Reed. Again, I was reading the blog. I saw some wise words from Dave, and I think it sounded pretty good to me. He's left Fred Davis in the dust. He's athletic. I think this is probably one of the last weeks you're going to be able to still get him at a reasonable price. RG3 has come to rely on him for the short pass now that his athleticism has come down a few notches, and I think this is another great matchup. Oh,
I agree. I mean, I would play him ahead of Garcon this week. I think he'll have better stats, and it's a good matchup. He's been doing great. He's been getting better. Like what I like to see in guys that I pick is the guys who are trending upward, and this guy's definitely trending upward. We may not have seen his best game yet. That'd be kind of scary.
He's trending upward, but he's a little too expensive for me. I don't think it's a bad pick. I think he'll have production, but I would probably lean towards Witten at that price. Witten's a little bit cheaper, and he's got a bigger sample size to go off of. Jordan Reed scares me a little bit.
See what happens. I'm taking a chance. I think, like you said, he's on his way up, and I think at some point the price is going to keep going higher too, so I'll take advantage of it while I can. Who's your defense this week, Dave?
My defense is New Orleans this week, and it's kind of standard with the defenses that I've been picking. I very rarely go with the high-priced defenses. Perhaps it's a mistake on my part because the 2 high-priced defenses are putting up big points, and maybe I'll learn my lesson one of these weeks. But the reason I like New Orleans is that New Orleans has been arguably the biggest surprise defensively this year. And they're coming off their worst defensive effort, but they're coming off that invaluable bye where they've had time to regroup. They're facing a Buffalo team that comes in, as we all know, with their backup quarterback. Their star running back is not having a very good season. He's still injured. I see New Orleans winning this game rather handily and forcing Buffalo into a situation where they have to throw more than they usually do, and that's going to create more sacks and more turnovers. So at a low price, I'm going to give you New Orleans this week.
Yeah, you talked about how those other couple defenses are putting up a lot of points. I've got the Chiefs this week, and they literally put up twice as many points as Dave's defense. So they're going against Cleveland too, which if Brandon Weeden starts, who knows? It's going to be someone of that caliber. There's going to be plenty of turnovers, and this defense scores a lot. So I love this defense this week.
Yeah, there hasn't been a week yet where I didn't like Kansas City. I also have been pleasantly surprised with New Orleans, but I decided this week to spend. Like you, I don't usually spend big on defense, but this week I went all in because I just can't pass up this matchup, and I went with Seattle because this week they're facing St. Louis, and St. Louis will be without Sam Bradford. Their offense was terrible. Well, maybe not terrible, but struggling already, and this will only make it increasingly terrible. I think that there's a chance that Seattle could put up something close to a shutout. I guess the only saving grace is that they aren't playing in Seattle, but I think it's going to be a great matchup, and for the first time, I'm willing to spend there.
Well, I'd say the only negative I would say about these two defenses, which I think are two great picks, is much like you said about Gronkowski. The price setters are catching up. I mean, they are moved the price on these two teams way up there, and I mean to the point where wow, I'd love to have these guys in the lineup, but then you've got to go a lot cheaper at a different position. I'm not ready to take that step yet, but like I said, I've been wrong about defenses pretty much all year, so I can't have much fault with these two teams.
Yeah, for me it's simple math though. What I talked about Gronkowski being 50% more than Gonzalez, he's not going to get twice as many points. The Chiefs are 50% more expensive than the Saints. They're going to get twice as many more points. So that's my reasoning. But the Seahawks, you've got to love that too. The only negative, as you mentioned, is that they're on the road, but against they signed Brady Quinn this week. So I mean, whoever they end up throwing out there is going to be in for a rough time.
Hoping for a few Brady Quinn passes right into the hands of the Seattle defense. That's all the time we have for today. That was the Fanmouth Fantasy Roundtable. Tell us what you thought about what we had to say on the blog at blog.fanmouth.com, or jump into the conversation on Facebook or Twitter at PlayFanmouth. Fanmouth.com. Play loud, play daily.